Okay, so welcome everyone to our PCS seminar, and it's a great pleasure to have today Professor Janos Asboth from Hungary. And let me now first try to pull out, Jesus Christ, my information here. Here we go. So Janos did his undergrads and master studies in at the Eötvös University in, I guess, in Budapest in Hungary, and then he moved on to do a PhD degree at Innsbruck University in Austria, after that he had various positions at Innsbruck University as a research assistant, and then sorry, I forgot to ask it, but this is okay. At the Institute for Solid State Physics and Optics of the Hungarian Academy of Science, I guess, and then also as a postdoc at Leiden University in the Netherlands. And then he moved on to become a research fellow at the Wigner Research Center in Budapest. And this was 10 years ago. And last year, he also joined the Budapest University of Technology and Economics as an associate professor, and now he holds two positions. He has a number of nice accomplishments, including, of course, a lot of publications, and in particular also a very well-received book called A Short Course on Topological Insulators, which was published in Springer Lecture Notes in Physics in 2016. And I think, Janos, this is the first time I met you. This is when I tried to understand what the heck is topology. So this is when I ran into that book, and I remember it was a very delightful reading. And he also, of course, has some other responsibilities, and he has also fellowships and awards. In particular, let me mention that I like this name. It's a Prima Primissima Foundation Junior Prima Prize he received from Hungary in 2012 as a young researcher, I guess. Right, and today Janos will speak about, and now I have to go back to my Zoom, anomalous levitation and annihilation in Floquet topological insulators. And maybe I should add one more a little fact, which is that one of our members, Arin Dam, spent some time just before joining us working with Janos in Budapest. And so this is one of the important connections we had with Janos, and this is also one of the reasons why we now have him here, because both are also productive in publishing new research results. Right, but now let's come to the talk of Janos, and let's maybe first welcome Janos with a very loud applause. And since this is always a bit a problem on Zoom and other platforms, let me try this here. And whenever I push the button, this is the Vorführ effect. It never works. Okay.
Great.
Okay, Janos, the scene is yours, please.
Thank you, Sergey, for the very friendly introduction. I was amazed to hear about all these accomplishments that Janos has had. So today I'd like to tell you about recent work that we did with Jon Kozma Fulga and Hui Liu. So I know Jon Kozma Fulga is a young researcher in Dresden. He did his master and his PhD in Leiden with Professor Carlo Benacker. And I know him from Leiden because during my time as a postdoc there, he was a master student and we interacted a little. So I had some ideas about how levitation and annihilation could take place in Floquet topological insulators, but I didn't have a concrete toy model to try those ideas out. And during one of our discussions with Kozma, this came up last year at the beginning of summer, and Kozma was very quick to suggest a model on which we could try this, and it worked quite well. And so Hui Liu, who is a PhD student starting his PhD with Kozma, he was also involved in this work, and this was a really pleasant ride in a couple of months, we saw that, that the idea works, and we have submitted the paper to Phys letters, and both referees were, they said they like the paper, but they think it's not for the broad readership of Phys letters, so it will be published probably in Physical Review Research. We are waiting for, so we have resubmitted to that journal. But it's on the archive, you can check out the details if you're interested. I put up this first slide to really tell the story in a nutshell before I go introducing the details. And the story is kind of intriguing. So what I'm showing here is energy is on the vertical axis and disorder is on the horizontal axis. Instead of energy, we have quasi-energy, which is related to energy in the same way as quasi-momentum is related to momentum in crystal systems. So we are talking about a periodically driven system like a quantum walk, although this is not a quantum walk, it's a different system. And so energy is periodic, quasi-energy goes, a quasi-energy of minus pi is the same as pi. And so if you have a two-band model, then you can have two gaps separating these two bands. The gap in the middle is the usual gap around zero energy, but there's also a second gap which is around pi quasi-energy. And if you have a Chern insulator, a topological materials are distinguished by having topological gaps, that is, gaps which host edge states. And the presence of topological gaps is only possible if you have delocalized states in the bulk, extended states in the bulk. And I'm going to explain this in more detail in the talk, so if this sounds incomprehensible at the moment, don't worry. These colors, the color scale here indicates the presence of extended states in the bulk. So as we switch on disorder, those extended states, they remain extended. This is in contrast to the usual picture we have of Anderson localization. We expect that for two-dimensional systems, if we don't have any special symmetry, then as a result of Anderson localization, all eigenstates of the system should localize. But this is not so in topological materials, in Chern insulators, for example. Their bands have to have at least one eigenstate per band, and in the scaling limit, so in the thermodynamic limit, it is really one state per band that is delocalized. And the only way these delocalized states can disappear, so in the very large disorder limit, those delocalized states also undergo Anderson localization, but the only way in which this can happen is that two delocalized states that, so to say, carry opposite Chern numbers, they levitate towards each other and they annihilate. This is indicated here with these dashed lines and this star symbol in the middle. This is where this annihilation of extended states carrying opposite Chern numbers happens. So this is a numerically obtained plot. This is something that it's a side product of our simulations, but this is something which is well known and was described in the 80s by Laughlin, and was part of the interesting physics of the quantum Hall effect. And on the right, you see a similar plot, but now we also start with a Chern insulator. We also start with a system where at zero disorder, we have a topological gap around zero and a trivial gap around pi. And as we are increasing the disorder, the two extended states also have to levitate towards each other and annihilate. But now they annihilate at the edge of the Floquet zone, so at pi quasi-energy. So during this process, it is not the trivial gap which grows, and at the large disorder limit, the whole system is an Anderson insulator, but it's the topological gap which grows. And so in the large disorder limit, we get something called an anomalous Floquet Anderson insulator, where all bulk eigenstates are Anderson localized, but we still have edge states. Okay, so this was, for some of you, this was probably mystical words, and I hope that after half an hour it will be more understandable.
Yeah.
Janos, sorry.
Yes.
Can I ask you something
Please.
about? So I think I learned a bit about what means topological band, which says characterized by some, if you wish, quantum number. But how
Yes.
would you characterize a gap where there are no states?
So the topological gap, the simplest way to characterize it is by creating an edge in your system and observing if there are edge states crossing this gap or not. So
you mean that by topological gap, this is a gap in which you get edge states?
Exactly. Yes.
Right. Mm-hmm. And the second question concerning these the black dashed lines, which indicate the one state per band with infinite localization length. This sounds very similar to me, familiar to me, or similar to, let's say, probably, not probably, a non-topological Anderson problem of a 1D tight binding chain with hopping disorder.
Yes.
Where you also have a divergent localization lengths at the origin of at zero energy because of asymmetry in the problem.
Yes,
and,
so there it's chiral symmetry, which is responsible for these extended states at zero energy. So,
and here is it the same? Is it? It's also a symmetry, right, which induces these.
Here, symmetry does not play a role. So the dispersion relation looks symmetric around zero, but we don't have chiral symmetry here.
Well, it can be a different symmetry, but it still probably is a symmetry which enforces the strict divergence of the.
No, here it's not. There is no symmetry requirement. Here it's the.
No, I'm not saying it's chiral, but I'm saying it's a symmetry.
No, it's not.
How do you know?
So there is a change in the topological number of the gaps. Well, to be more precise, it's the binding number of the gap. So the gap below and above the band have a different topological invariant, different value of the topological invariant. And this topological invariant in this case happens to be the Z-valued topological invariant, the one which is in connection with the Chern number. And for the Chern number, we don't require any symmetries. So here no symmetry is needed, but there is a similarity in the sense that the presence of this delocalized state is indicated by a divergence of the localization length, just like in the case of the chiral symmetric zero energy extended state that you mentioned.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So, as a brief introduction, I just want to warm you up by, or so these are the concepts which I will be using throughout this talk. When I say topological insulator, I mean the simplest kind of topological insulator, that is a band insulator. Band insulators are described by non-interacting Hamiltonians of this form, so they contain hooping terms and onsite potential terms. And if you have a band insulator, we are used to describing it in terms of the bulk properties, because in the bulk, for example, let's take a 2D system. This is a schematic plot of a 2D system. It has some kind of edges because every material has an edge, right? And you study it in the lab, but it has a nice bulk part. So if you take a lot of precautions and you fabricate your material to be a very nice crystal, and the bulk has a crystalline structure, and you can, the number of unit cells in the bulk dominates the number of edge unit cells for large enough system size. So you might think it doesn't matter what kind of boundary conditions you prescribe. You can take, for example, periodic boundary conditions, and then you can represent the eigenstates in the bulk by just plane waves. To each plane wave, you associate a wave number, quasi-momentum kx, ky, or in the 3D case, kx, ky, kz. And then there are these bands. So for each wave number, you have an associated energy eigenstate. its energy eigenvalue can be plotted in these band structure diagrams. For example, here, this is a band structure diagram of cadmium telluride, and you can see that there is a band gap here. The dotted line or the dashed line denotes the Fermi energy. So states below this energy are occupied, above this energy are empty at zero temperature, and there is a band gap here. So there is an energy window in which there are no bulk states. And although there are no bulk states in this energy window, there can be states which are confined to the edge. In fact, if we do have energy eigenstates of the system with energy in the bulk gap, then we know that they must be confined to the edge. So their wave function has to be localized somewhere around the edge of the system, and it has to decay exponentially towards the bulk. And the exponential decay length or penetration depth can be calculated from the bulk description of the system by inserting wave numbers, complex wave numbers into the dispersion relation. So there are these, if we are investigating this gap in this bulk energy gap, and we have edge states in this bulk energy gap, they can be along this quasi one-dimensional region, the edge in 2D. And even if the bulk is nice and translation invariant, the edge is quite often disordered because of the way that the material is produced. And normally in one-dimensional systems, disorder leads to Anderson localization. So the energy eigenstates which are confined to the edge, we expect them to be Anderson localized. So they would be finite extension not only towards the bulk, but also along the edge. And topological insulators are special because we not only say that the material might host eigenstates in the bulk gap, but we are sure that there are energy eigenstates in the bulk gap. Moreover, those energy eigenstates, because they are in the bulk gap, they are at the surface, but they are not Anderson localized along the surface, rather they are extended along the whole surface. So there is this interesting behavior of these energy eigenstates that they are immune against Anderson localization on the surface. On the other hand, yes, and we know that there are bulk states that have this property because those bulk states, they form branches of the dispersion relation, which are called edge state modes. And the number of such branches of the dispersion relation is a small integer. And this small integer, because it's an integer, it cannot change under continuous deformations of the bulk Hamiltonian, as long as the bulk gap is not closed. So if you, any continuous function of the bulk parameters, which is integer valued, is a constant, and such constants are the topological invariants. So this is a topological invariant of the system, and there is a second region, and for this reason, such materials are topological insulators. There's a second reason why these materials are called topological insulators, and this is because these bulk bands, they also have some small integers, topological invariants, that are associated to them. And those integers take the form of some kind of winding in momentum space. So the bulk energy eigenstates can be described in the Brillouin zone kx, ky, and usually the convenient language to express these winding numbers uses the language of Berry connection. So nk is the nth eigenstate, and an eigenstate here is represented by a dot. And so this dot tells you the momentum and the associated energy. But you can tell that there also is some extra structure to these eigenstates because you have several bands. So just specifying the momentum is not enough to fix the energy eigenstate. There's also some internal Hilbert space associated to the system, which is composed of orbitals and spin. And so this nk is the nth energy eigenstate. It is a Hilbert space vector because it contains these orbital and spin degrees of freedom. And then you can formally write now Berry connection for this nk, which describes the response as you tune the wave number. And then you can write down the integral of the Berry curvature associated to this Berry connection in the Brillouin zone. For example, this is how you obtain the Chern number. And there's a simple pictorial representation which is valid for two-band models, where the Chern number simply counts the number of skyrmions in the Brillouin zone. And we try to describe this in simple language in a set of lecture notes, which Sergey was kind enough to mention already. You can find these lecture notes also on the archive. It's the same version as the one which is published. Unfortunately, it contains some typos, and we are in the process of revising and submitting a second edition. So as I mentioned, in 1- and 2-dimensional coherent systems, disorder leads to Anderson localization of eigenstates in the generic case. So Sergey already mentioned an exception, which is if you have chiral symmetry, then states at zero energy are immune against Anderson localization. But if you don't have any symmetries, then you will get Anderson localization. Maybe just a simple intuitive picture to help understand why is that plane waves, they propagate in one direction. So this is here quasi-momentum, and this is here energy, and this would be here a dispersion relation of a simple lattice model of a solid in 1D. And you can see that right propagating states are here. At the same energy, I can also find the left propagating state here. So when I switch on disorder destroys the conservation of quasi-momentum. So it will couple the right and left propagating states. So it will lead to backscattering. So in the generic case, we expect that these plane waves which go a long way will not be able to go a long way. They will be backscattered and all eigenstates will localize. And this is a mathematically rigorous statement in 1D. There are also some, so as far as the mathematically rigorous description is concerned, I'm not, I didn't go very deep into this, but I think there are some open questions in 2D and above, but the consensus among physicists is that in 1D and 2D, generically, Anderson localization affects all energy eigenstates already at infinitesimal amount of disorder, except in 3D and above, where there is an interesting thing which is called Anderson transition. And I think I will not describe it now. So let's just push on. So as I just told you, in 2D topological insulators have edge states which escape Anderson localization. And Sergey was reminded of this escaping Anderson localization of the 1D chiral states. And there is
Janos?
Yes?
So, sorry to interrupt you. We have a question from Merab. Yep, Merab, go ahead.
Yes, hello, thank you for your lecture. Can you go to the previous slide, please? I want to clarify. So you mentioned that once we introduce disorder, the eigenstate with the momentum k gets coupled with the eigenstate with the momentum minus k. Why is it specific? Why you mention specifically minus k? In principle, all of them are coupled, and I didn't get what is special about minus k momentum.
Yes, very good, very nice. You are completely correct. All of them are coupled, but the effects of coupling are strongest in the case of resonant coupling. So the states which are very distant in energy, the corresponding transition rates will be small.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, so we can try to tell the same story of Anderson localization for edge states of topological insulators. And this is one concrete example of a topological insulator. This is a simple lattice model for the quantum Hall effect. So this is a nearest neighbor hopping model. We have hopping along the y direction, square lattice, hopping along the x direction. And for the hopping along the x direction, we have a phase here. So these phases come from magnetic vector potential. which represents a homogeneous magnetic field, which is perpendicular to the lattice surface. This is the setup of the quantum Hall effect. And if we tune the value of the magnetic field, then this will still be a translation invariant system, only with a unit cell, which is slightly larger, the so-called magnetic unit cell. So instead of a single band, there's no spin here, so we would expect a single band. Instead of a single band, we have 3 bands because of this larger magnetic unit cell, which hosts 3 sides. And you can see that in the Bloch dispersion relation, we see these 3 bands here. But I'm looking at a geometry which looks something like this. So the system has a boundary, and in the middle, and it also has some disorder. Disorder is represented by onsite potential here.
Janos,
yes?
Sorry to interrupt, but generally the magnetic field comes as an independent parameter, right? Here you have the Y as well. So because you would get something like the area times the magnetic field, roughly.
Exactly, yes. So the magnetic field has to be such.
Right. But this will depend on the lattice site where you are, this kind of a magnetic field.
No, the magnetic field is homogeneous, but I'm using the Landau gauge to, so I'm choosing my vector potential to point only along the x direction. And therefore it will increase linearly with y. I'm tuning the strength of the magnetic field to be such that the flux over 3 plaquettes is equal to 1 magnetic flux quantum.
Janos, another question that, in general, that's simply the Harper model, right? Which you're talking here about.
Pardon?
In general, that would be simply the Harper model or the Harper, I mean, you
yes,
get to
yes,
the Harper
exactly.
model.
This is the Harper model,
right.
Yeah.
Except you choose here a rational flux. Right, but you said that that gives probably not exactly, that gives this Hofstadter butterfly and all these interesting things, but not exactly the integer quantum Hall, or I mean...
It is the integer quantum Hall.
Right, so you get, what do you mean by it is? So you get exactly degenerate Landau levels?
Well, no, but it is the integer quantum Hall effect on the lattice. So the...
Yeah, yes, this I agree, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's, like you say, this is one slice of the Hofstadter butterfly corresponding to exactly 1/3, if you look at the flux per plaquette.
Right, and the spectrum in that case is not fractal, I guess, right? Or what is it? I don't know.
No, you just have 3 bands. So for any rational value of the magnetic field, you have bands, and if your magnetic field is P over Q, then you have Q bands.
Right.
And here it's 1/3, so Q is 3, so I have 3 bands. And these 3 bands are the bands I obtained numerically from this situation. And I'm cutting out the central part of this disordered sample, removing disorder from this central part. So disorder is indicated by these dots, and using, so also straightening out the edges over here. So for this central part, I have approximately translation invariance along the x direction. So kx is a good quantum number, momentum, quasi-momentum x. So I can, and then I will have bulk states, and I can also have edge states. Those edge states, so I can also have eigenstates in one of the bulk gaps. Those eigenstates have to be exponentially localized at the bottom or at the top edge. And so I can look at the corresponding eigenstates, and I can see numerically whether it is at the bottom or at the top edge, and I can assign a color to these states. And this is how I colored this dispersion relation over here. So you can see the 3 bulk bands. These are energy eigenstates that are extended over here. And you can see the blue line corresponds of states which are localized on the bottom edge, the red line on the top edge. And here you can see what these edge states, what I meant before by edge states forming a branch of the dispersion relation, which connects one band to the other band. For example, considering this bottom edge, you can see that there is an edge state mode which goes from left to right in this energy gap. And then at another energy gap, there is an edge state mode which goes from right to left. Such one-way propagating edge state modes are called chiral modes in the literature. And now we would like to say, if we switch on disorder perturbatively, then what will disorder do to these edge states? So disorder will couple energy eigenstates, as one of the questions rightfully remarked. It will couple states. Momentum kx will no longer be a good quantum number, so this state will be coupled to all other energy eigenstates, but the coupling only has a strong effect if it is resonant. And there is, in this energy window, there are no states which propagate towards the left. So there can be no backreflection here occurring as a result of this coupling. And so these energy eigenstates are robust against Anderson localization.
Janos,
Yes?
let me ask on that. Well, yes, there are no states at the same energy, but there are states at other energies. And yes, these will be weaker coupled, but still be coupled. So if I have a long enough edge, I could expect that I will still see localization. So therefore, there must be something more than just saying that there are no states at the same energy.
Okay, so there's a different way to phrase this. Maybe you will find this more convincing. So you can ask, let's put a particle in a wave packet on this bottom edge in this area, and let's create the wave packet with eigenstates in this energy window. So we have a Gaussian wave packet over here, and let's follow its time evolution. So what can happen to this wave packet? Before we introduce disorder in this central part of the system, but we do have a lot of disorder over here, as it is indicated in the plot. So this wave packet will start moving along the bottom edge because it is composed of states which live in this energy window, and all of these states have the group velocity which is moving towards the right. And energy is conserved. We are just using a time-independent Hamiltonian. So this wave packet will leave this area. So it is arriving in this area where there is a lot of disorder. So what will happen to this wave packet? And you might say, well, in this area, maybe the wave packet will be deflected and go into the bulk. Well, this is not possible because in the bulk, there are no states at the energy of the wave packet, and energy is conserved. So it has to stay somewhere in this edge region. So you say, in this edge region, I probably have Anderson localization. So this means this wave packet, once it has left this bottom edge, it will stop in this region. Okay, so maybe this wave packet stops in this region. Then once it has left the bottom edge, I put a second wave packet in. And because there is no overlap between the first wave packet and the second, their wave functions must be orthogonal. And I can just wait until each wave packet leaves this bottom edge and put in a new one. I'm always creating states that are orthogonal. And if states, when arriving to this disordered region, they stop, then they start filling up this region. But if all states have to remain orthogonal, then they can't, after some time, the space becomes filled up. If you only have a finite dimensional Hilbert space available for you because of Anderson localization on this part, then you run into a problem. So what this kind of thought experiment tells you is that states which were wave packets over here, when they arrive to this disordered part, they have to keep on moving because this disordered part has to accommodate new wave packets which could arrive from this clean part. So the only thing these wave packets can do once they leave this clean part is they move, and they move all around the perimeter of the system until they arrive at this top edge. At the top edge, there's no problem because in this energy window, we have propagating states anyway, which go in this direction. So this thought experiment tells you that, and this was not a perturbative explanation. So here I didn't use the fact that this disorder was small with respect to anything. So this epsilon can be arbitrarily large. What I used was only that this disorder was active in the edge region, but not in the bulk region. So this argument shows you that edge states of a Chern insulator cannot be Anderson localized, no matter how strong the disorder at the edge area. Okay, I have a passion for explaining, and this means that I'm running out of time for my talk. So
I will see how it goes. Don't worry. Thank you.
okay, okay. But I hope so. Have I answered your question, Sergey?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so this is a nice kind of dichotomy. So we have Anderson localization and states that are immune against Anderson localization, but we have the bulk states, and most of the bulk states, they are not immune against Anderson localization. But there have to be some bulk states that are also immune against Anderson localization, and this is this Laughlin's thought experiment, which explains this. This is called a Laughlin pump. So this Laughlin pump argument was right after the discovery of the quantum Hall effect, experimental discovery of the quantum Hall effect, and all this activity in investigation of topological physics in connection with quantum Hall effect was started in 1981. So that's like 3 years after the Hofstadter butterfly, and 1 year after the quantum Hall effect. So the thought experiment is the following: that we take a Chern insulator, a quantum Hall effect system, and divide it up into a cylinder. So we had these edge states, which on the previous slide you saw that were robust against Anderson localization. Those edge states will be propagating on the bottom or on the top edge. So here we have 2 arrows. They are for different directions of the magnetic field. So the interesting thing that happens is you can so the magnetic field of the quantum Hall effect is directed perpendicular to the surface of the sample. So here it's going radially inwards or radially outwards. But what you can also do is you can switch on an extra magnetic field which threads this cylinder. And the effects of this extra magnetic field can also be represented by associating a vector potential with it. And for this, it's convenient to use a circular gauge. So this vector potential will point along the direction of the cylinder. And the effects of this vector potential are represented by chiral substitution, just as for the magnetic field, which was perpendicular to the sample surface. And so, with a simple gauge choice, this can be described as just translating. So, increasing the vector potential means translating energy eigenstates by 1 unit of delta k, where k is this wave number along the edge. And as this flux is increased, energy eigenstates are translated along the horizontal direction in this dispersion relation plot, and therefore this is an energy pump. So if this is done theoretically, energy eigenstates climb up in energy because they are translated horizontally. So energy eigenstates from the bottom band are pushed up on this conveyor belt into the top band. For example, if we focus on this bulk here between the lowest and the middle band. So on one edge, this pump pumps states up. On the other edge, this pump pumps states down. And we can use the same type of argument as before. We can say we run this pump cycle after cycle after cycle, then we are always pumping energy eigenstates up on one edge of the system. Those energy eigenstates, they have to go somewhere. They cannot come back to the bottom edge, bottom band. Well, they can come back to the bottom band, but only if they go across the the bulk of the system. But if now we have Anderson localization in the bulk, if we have disorder in the bulk, all bulk eigenstates are Anderson localized. Therefore, they don't reach around this cylinder. And if they don't reach around this cylinder, then they don't even see the effects of this magnetic field. This magnetic field, for them, can always be gauged away. So Anderson localized bulk states don't see the effects of this energy pump. But if all bulk states are Anderson localized, then this energy pump therefore cannot pump states across the bulk from one edge to the other. But then we run into a problem because we would be pumping states always up on one edge of the system. We would run into a problem with orthogonality of energy eigenstates. So therefore, this energy pump has to take states from one edge to the other. And this is only possible if there is at least one delocalized energy state for each topological band. And this is the generic picture one can have. This is a sketch for the quantum Hall effect with disorder. So here is disorder, here is energy, and there are two bulk bands. In the simplest model, just two bulk bands. Those two bulk bands become wider and wider as disorder is increased. There is a gap between them. This gap hosts edge states. This gap closes because the bulk bands become wider and wider. But even if the bulk gap closes, the edge states can still remain because the bulk is at that point consists of Anderson localized states. And whenever there is an edge state branch, it has to terminate on a delocalized bulk state. So there are these narrow windows which become infinitely narrow in the thermodynamic limit, which contain delocalized states. This is reminiscent of the way that Anderson localization works in 3D, where you have localized states at the wings of the distribution, so at the edges of the band, but the central part of the band contains delocalized states. Okay, and I would like to call your attention to a paper which is a quite long paper, but it's very carefully written. I think it's a nice paper if you want to see how you can numerically investigate this type of effects. This is by Emil Prodan. You can find it on the archive. This is a numerical study of levitation, annihilation. Oh yeah, this is called levitation, annihilation. The two extended states levitate towards each other and annihilate. In the original context, when Laughlin introduced this levitation happened upwards, but this is because this was a different setting. So for the setting that we are looking at, Chern insulators, simplified systems, then it's like this. So this is you can see how as disorder is increased, here there are many disorder realizations whose spectrum is plotted here, and you can see that the bulk there are two bands. The bulk gap between the two bands closes, closed, and what is also plotted is the level spacing distribution as a function of energy. So here in order to obtain these level spacing distributions, Prodan had to take many disorder realizations. You can see that the level spacing distribution indicates Anderson localized states here. This is this exponential curve over here at the edges. But in the middle of the energy band, for example, this green line connecting to over here, it indicates absence of Anderson localization, so extended states. This Wigner-Dyson distribution. And yes, and you can see that these regions that host extended states, they levitate towards each other and eventually they annihilate. And then beyond a certain degree of disorder, all energy eigenstates are Anderson localized. This is in contrast to a different parameter value of this model. This model is the Chiboujian model, so it's the simplest lattice model for a Chern insulator. This is like the Haldane model, but it is on a square lattice. So in the topologically trivial case, where there are no Chern numbers, Anderson localization happens instantaneously. So you see some indications of extended states over here, but these are just finite size effects. So as you increase the system size, you'll see that all energy eigenstates are Anderson localized. Good. So now we come to the main interest of our talk, which is periodically driven systems. And periodically driven systems can host anomalous topologically protected edge states, even if all bulk bands are non-topological. And I'm doing quite badly with time. So
I don't think there's a problem. Well, let's see. So you, how much time do you think you will need roughly?
So I have 8 more slides.
Yeah.
So maybe I will speed up a little, and then in 20 minutes I should be able to finish.
That's perfect. Just continue.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So this is a simple toy model for these anomalous edge states in two-dimensional periodically driven systems. Was proposed by Rudner, Linderberg, and Levin in 2013. This is a very friendly physics of X paper. And you can follow what this toy model is. It's simply it consists of a nearest neighbor hopping Hamiltonian. There is no internal structure of the particle, so it's really just like a spinless particle on a square lattice. And there's only nearest neighbor hopping terms, but almost all of the hopping amplitudes are set to 0. So it's only the hopping amplitudes that are indicated by colors, which are non-zero, and they all have the same value. And during the time evolution, we switch which of the hopping amplitudes have non-zero value, and we carefully time each of these steps so that in the hopping amplitudes are switched on for just enough time for a pi pulse. So a particle which is, for example, we focus on this black site over here, then the first pi pulse will take it to this white side. This is just Rabi oscillation between these two sides, and I'm stopping Rabi oscillation after one half period. Then the second pi pulse takes it down here, the third pi pulse over here, and the fourth pi pulse up here. So in fact, during these 4 steps, it has just fulfilled a full circle. And so this means that it has come back to where it was at the beginning. So if I take any wave function, which consists of a superposition of such localized states, then during time evolution it will somehow change its shape. But at the end of one entire time step, it will be exactly the same shape as it was before. So it's like we are doing something to the system, but if we are only looking at the system at integer times at the end of every time step, then it looks like we are doing nothing. The effective bulk Hamiltonian appears to be just 0, nothing. But it's doing nothing in a complicated way, and you can tell by focusing on particles that live on the edges. So for example, let's start with this black dot here. So the first pi pulse takes it to this white dot. And then during the second part of time evolution, there are no pi pulses affecting it, so it just stays here. Then it's taken over here, and again, then it stays. So this means it has not done nothing, it has progressed in one direction. And you can convince yourself by using the same kind of line of thought that every state in the bulk goes round and round in circles, and every state on the edge goes in one direction only. This is a chiral edge state over here. The corresponding dispersion relation looks like this. The bulk bands are just 0. Everybody is at 0, so it's a flat, featureless dispersion relation. But the edge state dispersion relation looks like this. So this is, we now have quasi-energy instead of energy. So these diagonal lines are allowed. They are periodic in K as well as in E. And because all of these bulk states, they are just at 0 energy, they also cannot have any Chern number. You can convince yourself easily, and you can also do the calculation and find it. So there are no Chern numbers here, and yet there are chiral edge states. So this is a new feature which is only possible for periodically driven systems, and this was described by these 4 authors in 2013. They also found the associated bulk topological invariant. And they also pointed out in a paper written 3 years later that in such systems, if you also switch on a disorder, for example, in the form of onsite potentials, then disorder can Anderson localize all of the bulk states, but the edge states are still immune against Anderson localization. So the fact that edge states are immune against Anderson localization is the same as in the standard Chern insulator case. But the fact that all of the bulk states are localized, we don't need any of these delocalized states to carry the Chern numbers. This is new. And actually, we don't have Chern numbers here. So the states are non-topological. And also, there's this Laughlin pump argument. There's no problem with the Laughlin pump, because as you are threading magnetic flux through the system, states are going up and up in energy, but then going around in quasi-energy. So we don't, so everything is okay. You can sort of compactify the description of your system to one edge, and you still have no problems. And such systems are called anomalous Floquet Anderson insulators. They have complete Anderson localization in the bulk, and yet chiral edge states immune against Anderson localization on the edges. And then this was my idea that it would be interesting to see if we have this anomalous levitation and annihilation taking place in Floquet Chern insulators. I already explained this at the beginning of the talk. So we have the standard setup here. We have the non-topological case here. So this is anomalous Floquet Anderson insulators. We start with a system with 2 bands, but no Chern numbers, edge states in the whole Floquet zone. We add disorder, so everybody is just Anderson localized in the bulk, no problem, and the edge states are still there, no problem. But maybe there's a transition between Chern insulators like this and anomalous Floquet Anderson insulators like this. If there is such a transition, it has to happen in this way. And so this is exactly what we found with Cosma, and with Cosma and Hui Liu. So I tried originally with the Chibuzhang Hamiltonian, and it turned out that the problem was that the bulk gap was not large enough. So we needed a toy model which has a bulk gap which is comfortably large, large with respect to the bandwidth of the excited and the ground state. And so there is a toy model in a paper by Titus Neupert and co-authors from 2011, which Cosma suggested to try. And we went ahead with this. So this is the toy model. It contains, so it's a model defined as square lattice, nearest neighbor and next nearest neighbor hopping terms. And the next nearest neighbor hopping terms they are complex. So this, in this sense, it's similar to the Haldane model. And but it's a simple toy model. You can write down the Hamiltonian in just 2 lines. And the way we added disorder to this model, so this model is a time-independent Hamiltonian. But remember, we wanted to start from a Chern insulator. And this is what this model is. It's a Chern insulator. This is described in this Neupert paper. So there are 2 bands. The 2 bands have opposite Chern numbers. are edge states. This is a plot which we obtained numerically from this model, right? So you see the edge states, they are indicated by continuous and dashed lines for 2 edges. So to add on-site potential to this, instead of having time-independent on-site potential, we added on-site potential in the form of Dirac delta-like kicks of potential energy. So this is the H0 is the Hamiltonian, which is switched on all the time, and this this is the disorder potential, which is Dirac delta-like in time. And in this way, we get from a time-independent Hamiltonian to a periodically driven Hamiltonian. And so this gives us a way to increase disorder over here, but starting from a Chern insulator over here. And to understand the effects that one might expect, it's helpful to look at the system first in the case of disorder artificially set to 0. So you switch on. It's like kicking, instead of kicking the system periodically, you just observe the system periodically. But what you can play with here is not only the system parameters, we keep those fixed, but you can also play with the period of observation. So this period of observation here is on the horizontal axis, period t. And if this period of observation is really small, you are observing the system very fast, then you are really, it's like continuous observation of the system. You get the same Hamiltonian as before. When I say observation, I don't mean to say that I'm interfering the system in any way. I'm performing no measurements or whatever. I'm just describing the time evolution of the system. So there are the 2 energy bands here, but formally you can also represent these 2. You can also represent the Floquet replicas of these 2 energy bands. So we could this is like the quasi-free approximation for electrons in a periodic solid, where even before you take lattice effects into account, you have not only a single parabola, but a second parabola which is shifted, and a third one, and the fourth one, taking into account other Brillouin zones, even though there are no lattices yet. And so if we increase the period time, this decreases the size of the Floquet zone. This is like in the quasi-free approximation, bringing those parabolas closer and closer together, and this is what happens over here. So the Floquets, nearest Floquet zones begin to overlap. And then if they do, then you can see that there is a gap here which closes and reopens. And so in this way, we can engineer the system by choosing this time period t. We can select whether it is the topological gap, which is larger, or it is the trivial gap, which is larger. So over here, the trivial gap is really small, the topological gap is large. Over here, the topological gap is small, the trivial gap is large. So the simple picture that we find is that this decides the fate of the system. So when we when we switch on disorder, then in the end, with enough disorder, we get Anderson localization of all eigenstates, but one of the gaps wins. It's either the topological gap which wins or the trivial gap which wins. Okay, I skipped over a slide, but maybe it's not worth it. Maybe I just explained this slide as well. So the tool that we used was the scattering matrix calculation. So the scattering matrix calculation is it's a convenient way to detect topological states for 2-dimensional and actually also higher dimensional topological insulators. So the setup is, so this state was introduced in 2010, and so starting from 2010 by the groups of Carlo Benacker and also other people from Berlin. But so for this scattering description of topological insulators, we need to create a scattering setup. So we have the two-dimensional system which we want to investigate is indicated by light green here. So we're going to attach semi-infinite leads, an input lead and an output lead. So you can take periodic boundary conditions in the transverse direction. This is like having a cylinder, which consists of the system and then of the leads. Or you can take open boundary conditions over here, which means you will have edges on this side. And then you are interested what happens to, so you are interested to calculate scattering states, that is, what happens to a wave packet which is incident from the semi-infinite lead on the left. Is it transmitted to the right? Is it reflected to the left? And if it's transmitted or reflected, what will its shape be? So so this lead has many modes at any given energy. So if you create a wave packet in one of these modes, how will it be distributed between these possible left-going modes here and right-going modes over here? The answer to this question is given by the scattering matrix. And the scattering matrix consists of the reflection and transmission parts. And the way to calculate scattering matrix for these time-dependent systems contains some tricks. And this was first suggested by Fedorov and Sommers in 2000 and was described for studying topological insulators by Kozma Fulga and Maximienko in 2016. So Fulga knew how to use this tool quite well. And so we used this tool. What we actually did was we just compared transmission without edges here, so taking periodic boundary conditions, and transmission in the presence of two edges over here. So if you have an Anderson localized bulk, then the total transmission across the bulk should decrease exponentially. Zeta is the localization length. If you make this, increase the size of this system, for example, increasing the length and the width as well, then transmission should go down exponentially. Whereas over here with edges, we have Anderson localized bulk, its contribution to the transmission goes down exponentially, but we also have edge states that are immune against Anderson localization. So they will constitute channels for transmission, which are completely open, using this Landauer description of electrical conduction or of transmission across coherent systems. So if we have a number W of edge states, then we will observe that the total transmission is W plus e to the minus L over zeta. So this is how the tool that we used, and these are the numerical plots. So this is disorder increasing in this direction, and here we are increasing the period in this direction. And white indicates no transmission, orange indicates transmission of 1, red is 2, dark red is 3, black is 4. So in the left, you have the situation with periodic boundary conditions. On the right, you have the situation with edge states. And so here you can see, for example, let's focus on this dotted blue line over here. So for low disorder, sorry, these two plots are for 0 quasi-energy and pi quasi-energy. So the middle of the Floquet zone and the edges of the Floquet zone. So over here for small disorder, we have no transmission, and also over here no transmission. So we have complete Anderson localization of the bulk. But if you look at the configuration with edges, we have no transmission at pi quasi-energy, but we do have transmission at 0 quasi-energy. So this indicates that we have edge states at 0 quasi-energy, but no edge states at pi quasi-energy. So this is the hallmark of a Chern insulator. But now as we increase the disorder, what you see is that the edge state at 0 energy goes away. So at the infinite, here it's not infinite disorder. Here the maximal value of this disorder is pi, because disorder is just flashing a phase, imprinting a phase onto the wave function at every. separated by regular time intervals t. So at maximal phase disorder, we have no edge state conduction at 0 or at pi quasi-energy. So this is a regular Anderson insulator. All energy eigenstates are localized. There are no edge states. So this is consistent with regular levitation and annihilation of edge states. However, if we go to this purple parameter values, what we see is that the edge states are there for all values of the disorder, and there also in the infinite or maximal disordered case. At pi quasi-energy, we see edge states appearing at some finite value of the disorder and then being there. So these are actually the two plots which I showed you at the beginning of the talk. So this is the conventional, and this is the anomalous levitation and annihilation which is happening. And then we investigated further. We wanted to know what is the criterion which decides whether we will have conventional or anomalous levitation or annihilation. And it's tempting, based on Chalker-Coddington network model description of the system, it is tempting to say that sort of the larger gap wins. So if we increase the disorder for this specific type of disorder, then if we want to predict whether a system without disorder will become an Anderson insulator or an anomalous Floquet Anderson insulator, we just have to compare the sizes of the two gaps, and the topological invariant of the larger gap will be the topological invariant of the system in the large disorder case. And yeah, there's a qualitative argument I can give for that, but we didn't put it in the paper in the end because we wanted to hurry up with publication. But I think it's something that we want to investigate in detail. So it's something we have planned to investigate in more detail. And it turned out to work surprisingly well. So this naive criterion, which I just told you, if we play with parameters of the system, so we change the hopping amplitudes of the nearest neighbor and next nearest neighbor hoppings, then it predicts the phase boundaries which are shown by these dotted lines. And the numerics, so there are no fitting parameters here. We just input this naive condition based on the Chalker-Coddington network model. It fits very well with the numerics. So indeed, in the case of periodic boundary conditions, we have low transmission here, low transmission here. With edges, we see quantized transmission here, with different quantized transmission values. So that's all I wanted to tell you about today. So, so what we did was we took a Chern insulator and we turned it into a periodically driven system by a very special kind of drive, on-site potential, disordered on-site potential, which was applied with Dirac-Delta-like kicks. And this can result in levitation and annihilation of the edge state, of the bulk states carrying the Chern numbers, or anomalous levitation, annihilation, and transition into an AFAI, anomalous Floquet Anderson insulator. And we have found a simple criterion that the topological invariant at maximal disorder is predicted. So we can say that this is the winding of the dominant gap without disorder. We have a couple of open questions, which is what if there are not just two bands, but more bands? It's this simple criterion, I expect it to break down. Cosmo expects it to still work. So we are not in agreement whether this, what our intuition would suggest. So this will be interesting to see. And we were thinking of investigating various symmetry classes. As Sergei mentioned, symmetries often have important roles in topological insulators. They can bring new topological invariants, or they can constrain the values of topological invariants. And what about higher order topological invariants? Anyway, please you can read. I didn't update this. It is not today. This is 2 months ago, but you can find the paper on the archive. And I'm sorry for going way over time, and thank you for your attention.
Okay. Thank you very much, Janos, for this very nice talk. Don't worry that it was a bit longer than maybe you thought it will be, but we had lots of questions, and I hope there are still some questions from the audience. And I see already, oh gee, here they come. So let's start with Sung Jong. I don't know, can you unmute yourself? Then just please go ahead, try that. Otherwise, we'll have to do that. Yeah.
I can do that. So my question is, I'm just wondering if there's any way of gauge transformation of the system to swap the topological gap with the non-topological gap.
Yes. Yes. So this is a very good question. So choosing the boundaries of the Floquet zone. So I set them here to from -π to π. But it's easy to change these boundaries. For example, if you just apply an onsite potential, then this will result in displacing these boundaries, both of them vertically, up or down. So in the end, when I say displacing boundaries, so with the onsite potential, I'm actually displacing the energies, but I could also change my frame of reference, let's say, or it's like choosing a branch cut for the logarithm. So when I say the topological, so I said that Chern insulator has a topological gap in the middle and trivial gaps at the edges. But which one I consider to be the middle and which one I consider to be the edges for this periodically driven system, it's a matter of choice. So in the end, the property of levitation and annihilation, which is conventional, is that the topological gap goes to 0 and the trivial gap wins. So this is what, and this is gauge invariant.
Okay.
Okay. We have another question by Kodo. Kodo, please unmute yourself, or I can unmute you. Yes. Okay.
Okay. Thank you for your talk. And could you show me page 4?
It's coming.
Yes, thanks. And you told when there is one wave packet in bottom edge, and the wave packet just follow through the edge, and it cannot go to bulk. Could you explain again why it cannot go to bulk again?
So you might think that you start with the wave packet over here. It is taken like on a conveyor belt. It's transported over here, and from here it will go towards the bulk.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. You might think this is okay, but in all this process, I have a time-independent Hamiltonian which is controlling my dynamics. So energy is conserved. So if there is no disorder in the bulk, like it is shown over here, so disorder only affects the edge regions, then for the bulk, the energy eigenstates are described by this dispersion relation, which is plotted over here. So at the energy where I have my wave packet, I'm composing the wave packet from states which live in this energy window. In this energy window, there are no extended states in the bulk. So any energy eigenstates of the system must decay exponentially towards the bulk, which means that they can only describe processes which correspond to reflection from the bulk. They can't penetrate deep. Does this help?
Yes, thanks.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, do we have other questions? Maybe I have another question, more technical. Your results were obtained using the scattering setup. So the
Yes.
scattering matrix method, as you called it. Previous results, which you showed from others, were obtained using simply level spacing statistics analysis. You could also maybe take some energy resolved eigenfunction, you know, inverse participation ratio, whatever.
Yes.
That is now what makes this scattering matrix approach method superior to the other methods?
Yes, this is a very valid question. So we didn't. So we reached for this numerical tool because this seems to be more efficient, but we didn't do any in-depth comparison. So I don't even know if we started looking at level spacing distributions here. So I think we thought about it, and the computational cost seemed prohibitive. But I'm not sure if we were very careful in assessing this. So we were initial estimates suggested that this transmission method could be more efficient. But I think it's something we should really do. We should show signatures in the level spacing distribution as well. They should be there.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. There's another question by Alexei. Would you please, or let me just unmute you? Okay, Alexei, please. Oh, now you muted yourself again. No.
Okay. Yeah. Fine. Yeah. Sorry. A very simple question. Perhaps does the type of disorder play any role here? I presume that you're using just simple onsite disorder. Is that correct?
Onsite disorder. That is correct.
Yeah, I was just curious. I mean, say another common type of disorder that people like, the Aubry-André, was it periodic?
I didn't catch.
I was, again, so what do you think anything would change if instead of just on-site disorder with no correlations, you would swap it for Aubry-André disorder?
Yeah. So I don't. So yeah. So this would be something like having a quasi-crystalline type of disorder, something which is. So yeah. So I know. So this. I know some of this Aubry-André work for 1D systems, and I don't quite know how it would work in this 2D situation, but so it is possible that you would get something qualitatively different. I also expect that if so, we took the simplest type of disorder, which is on-site potentials and no correlations between the sites. So IID. We took a box disorder, so to say, flat distribution between two different phase values, and changing this by, for example, using correlated disorder could also give qualitative changes to the results. We didn't do any investigation of that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I think there is another question by Sung Jong. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead, please.
I think it's a simple question. How do you decide the amount of Anderson localized states compared to the total bulk state after the calculation? If, for example, if someone do the numerical calculation.
Yes. So here, when I said the simple, maybe this corresponds to this saying which is the dominant gap. Was that the question, or no? The question was.
Well, I mean, if you have like all those eigenstates, all the states, then how do you decide which one is localized, Anderson localized?
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. So here one thing that is conventionally done is to plot the localization length as a function of energy, and then a divergence of the localization length would indicate that there is an energy window where you have no Anderson localization. And instead of this, what we plot here, this color coding, this is simply the transmission which is measured in the situation with no edge states. So with no edges, sorry. So with on a cylinder geometry, so periodic boundary conditions in the transverse direction. So here, if we have Anderson localized states, then their contribution to the transmission should decrease exponentially with the system size. So these plots, they are just showing results taken at one fixed system size, but we compare different system sizes. For the numerics, I think we could go up to 100 or 120. I can check in the paper. And so the signature of extended states is that we have substantial transmission across the bulk.
Okay.
Which is not a yes/no characterization. It's an indication of extended states. So in principle, these extended states, their contribution to the transmission should be independent of the system size. So when we scale up the system, transmission should be constant, and we did such scaling analysis for the kind of small system sizes that we can access, and I think we included those in the appendix. I hope we included.
So is it? I mean, theoretically known that all the bulk state can be what is it? The Anderson localized in the topological. I mean, in the Chern insulators.
So in Chern insulators, the theory predicts that there has to be, so for small disorder, there has to, for each band which has a Chern number, non-trivial Chern number, there has to be at least one energy eigenstate which is not Anderson localized. As you increase the disorder, then this picture breaks down somewhere, and this is this levitation and annihilation of extended states. For trivial states, for trivial bands, bands with Chern number 0, all of their bulk states should Anderson localize. So it can happen that they don't, and it's, for example, if your disorder is not generic enough. For example, if you have some extra symmetry like chiral symmetry, and your disorder does not break this chiral symmetry, then it can happen that even those bands will contain extended states.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, so I would say maybe we finish on this note, and before we will come to the final clapping of hands, I just want to thank Janos once again, and we actually agreed that we will have a little break, and maybe we will meet at whatever your hour is currently 00:30, so at
Okay.
At the half hour, and anyone who wants to either discuss with Janos or wants to agree upon some discussion time or date is welcome to join this little coffee or whatever tea break, and we'll see where we go on from there. And with that, I want to thank you very much.
Thank you.